Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy International Women's Day. We're really excited that you're here to celebrate with us. And we're especially excited to be able to celebrate the launch of this incredible book, The Everyday Feminist, with our incredible Professor Latanya Mapp Frett here in Pop Fam. We're quite proud of her, and we're so excited to be here with you all today to get to celebrate this momentous occasion. Latanya is here with Siva, and they're going to have a conversation about feminism and activism and the book. We are also raffling off some of the book, which is super exciting. Manuela was passing around little name sheets, so please make sure at some point before we do the raffle, you're able to do that. Get some food if you didn't get some food, and we'll get started. So I'll pass it off to you all.
We're online. Yeah, so now it's on. And I am super excited, not just to have everyone that we have in the room today, a lot of students, a lot of colleagues. Oh, sorry, he wants me to, show the book properly. Thank you. But also I have my mother on the line. So, that's a special thing to have. Yeah. So hi, Mom, wherever you are. So it's really good to be here. This book really is a labor of love. I call it my COVID project. But I joined Global Fund for Women in 2019, and like 6-8 months later was COVID. And it changed everything. But what it also did was punctuate the work that women, particularly grassroots women, are doing in their communities, and how fast we have to shift and how fast we have to figure out how to be supportive, how to continue to help our communities and our countries figure out where we are. And it just became so clear to me that these grassroots women are doing all of this work, continuously showing up, continuously showing out, but with very, very little real resources to be able to do that. And I say in the book, we're quick to praise these women, when they're the nurses, the PTAs, the moms, the aunties, we love them. But when it's time to get the resources to do that work, it's really uncomfortable for many of the organizations to be able to be in solidarity with them. And so my hope is by telling these stories in the book, and both about the women that I've met in the 15 countries where I live, but also the spotlighted women in the book. Some of them some of them you don't. My hope is that we get comfortable with them. We get comfortable with seeing how their work, if resourced properly, can really make a huge difference. Welcome, welcome, everyone. So today, I have the privilege of having one of those everyday feminists with me. We've been in partnership, I guess, for some time now, just because of this women's activist, organizations and movements that we work through. And so Siva, please introduce yourself before we go into conversation.
Yeah. So I'm Siva Thanenthiran. I'm the executive director of ARROW, which is the acronym, because we love acronyms, for the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. And ARROW is based in Asia and the Pacific. So we work across 15 countries and with almost 100 partners. We've been a great partner with Global Fund for Women from the early years, because one of the ways in which feminists and the women's movement used to interact was actually to travel to important meetings and actually agitate and put the agenda forward, for change. And the Global Fund for Women, a long time ago, I think in the 90s, and at the time of the great big conferences, actually facilitated travel of women from the Global South so that their voices could be heard in these international venues, which they are very often left out of. So that's where our relationship started. And now we have this amazing work on access to safe abortion services, which, is something that we're very excited about. And so the partnership grows in so many different dimensions. And I'm happy, to be here with all of you, because I think there is so much of differences that, kind of create rifts between all of us living between the global north and the global south, between different communities based on, race, religion, caste, where I come from, right? But I think that one of the things that feminism allows us to do is to interrogate, the privileges and oppressions that we all face, and yet, kind of create a theory about living and being and changing the world that we live in. So now it's up to you to
Yes,
do some great.
So I'm going to do a reading because this is what you do when you write a book. So very short from the introduction, and I'll just do it standing because it's just so much easier to do it that way. Okay, so thank you, Jackie. So let's see. Sorry, I should have had it on the page. Okay. It was 1992, and refugees were arriving in Nairobi, fleeing growing civil unrest in the neighboring countries of Rwanda and Burundi. I began studying public international law at the University of Nairobi and volunteering a couple of times at the United Nations High Commission on Refugees Center, filing documents, finding applications, and fetching the weirdly milky tea that was brought to Kenya by the British colonialists centuries ago. When I signed up at the age of 21 to go to Nairobi as part of a law school study abroad program, I knew nothing about the history or crisis at the time of the former Rwanda-Urundi territory, which had been colonized by Belgium after World War I, and later split in half during their 1962 liberation. But gradually I learned that the Hutu-Tutsi ethnic conflict and the strife stemmed from class welfare, with the Tutsis perceived to have greater wealth and social status, as well as favoring cattle ranching over what is seen as the lower class farming of the Hutus. Between 1990 and 1993, government officials directed massacres of the Tutsi, killing hundreds. While studying and working in Nairobi, I met a woman named Innocent. When I entered Innocent's braiding salon near the central business district of Nairobi for the first time, I was amazed by the diversity of her clientele. The one room with its movable ink and dryer in the back was crowded with men and women, mostly refugees from Rwanda and Burundi, as well as a smattering of Kenyans, Sudanese, Ugandans, and Tanzanians, some book learned and some not. Most spoke a plethora of languages, though often relied on the common Bantu languages. As the patrons got their hair done, they were passionately engaged in conversations about the civil wars, current and past, in their homelands. I learned how to pronounce the Rwandan president Habyarimana's name before I even knew who he was, because it was mentioned so often and with such force at Innocent's place. Innocent and her crew at the salon were mostly Tutsi, and she was a wealth of resources for her community. She was tall, a paper bag brown like me, wore expertly braided styles, and always dressed as if she was going to a gala, with exquisite African design materials and modern yet comfortable styles. Her offerings went beyond beauty styling and products to include immigration lawyers who could provide legal means to work and livelihood. She did cigarettes, marijuana, and more serious drugs, from medications to hallucinogens for more traditional practice. She did direct counseling for women in situations of violence, and contraceptives, including condoms, the pill, and referrals for more complicated matters. This model of providing contraceptives and hair salons would come back to me when I joined Planned Parenthood 2 decades later. Innocent was also a master recruiter. Anyone meeting her became a member of her network. My law school friends and I soon learned that a trip to Innocent's salon was a day-long affair. After getting our braids done, she had a host of files of people who were looking to apply for visas to the United States, no matter that we weren't yet lawyers, or needed documents translated to English, no matter that we couldn't read their languages. On more than one occasion, she was a matchmaker of sorts in setting up blind dates for her community, because of course we had to get married one day. And then there was Innocent's after hours meetings, usually filled with women only, which I was privileged to attend a couple of times. In these meetings, Innocent was joined by community elders with intelligence on what was happening back in their home country of Rwanda. They were armed with phone messages indicating what family or community member was headed to Nairobi. They knew just who arrived and what they required. At one meeting, a woman who appeared to be nearly 100 told Innocent, "Daughter, we need food for 200, housing for 35 families, schools to accommodate 75 primary age children, and jobs for 50 men. They will be here this weekend or soon after, and there is no time to spare. We don't have any money, but we will ask in church this Sunday for donations. Can you help? Innocent's response was always a resounding yes. She would dole out commands to several younger women, and the organizing took place right there in that one little salon. Innocent was my formative teacher in understanding Uruguayan writer Eduardo Galeano's quote, "Many little people in little places doing little things can change the world." After returning to the United States, I thought of her every time I heard the news about Rwanda. I tried to stay in touch, but I dare say that she had way more important things to do in the following years. She was busy receiving more and more legal and illegal refugees from both Rwanda and Burundi during those years leading up to the genocide. Ultimately, in 1994, during the 100 days of slaughter, some 800,000 people were killed in the genocide against the Tutsi people. An estimated 100 to 250,000 women were raped, and more than 2 million people fled the country. Innocent is what I call an everyday feminist. So over to you, Siva.
Much for that. I think I love the way that the passage you started with is actually one that shows us both the macro aspects that feminists deal with, as well as the micro aspects, right? That we are intensely interested in the situation not only of war and refugees, but at the same time what affect women in everyday lives, right? And how we gather around our kitchens, our couches, our hair salons, and all of the time we're plotting for change. So what made you write The Everyday Feminist?
It was that. And I want to mention, because I have chapter 9 just walked into the door. All these women who have been spotlighted have now become my chapters. But Leslie Obioro from Nigeria, she's the minister of mine when I was there. And you can read more about her and her work and just how committed she's been. It is women like her, like Tarana, like Haywen, and just so many other women that are both spotlighted in the book, but also the innocent of the book. Every place I've lived, there's been some woman who has taken me under their wing from that country and both leveraged whatever I could bring, but also taught me so much about the work that we do. I have been, from early in my career on human rights, very much committed to women's human rights. So it's been easy for me to think about, when I got to Global Fund for Women, a way to highlight that work, a way to talk about, I think, what we say every day about women, and that we know, but for some reason, we still can't get the resources to the work that they're committed to. For some reason, philanthropy, corporate, even bilateral government have a difficult time understanding why we should fund these women. And to be honest, I was just looking at the data from OECD and saw that not only are we only getting 1.9% of the overall money to grassroots women's groups that are doing this work and leading these movements, but it's going down. So 2021 was worse than 2020. And I think we have to, ring the bell, start the rallying call. Like you said, stand up and say it. Because it's one thing for the rhetoric to be like, I love these women, they're so great, they're doing amazing things. And then for them to have to struggle, they can't even pay themselves.
And I think that that's so true in the sense that, on International Women's Day, there's so much of pink washing that goes on, right? And people say, oh yeah, we celebrate women, we love women and all of that, but we want fund women, right? And I think that one of the great things that Global Fund does, and also Arrow tries to do in our work, is to make sure that there's some sort of equitable resource division, right? Because at the end of the day, the agenda, the issues that we believe in, that change is wrought by all of these women mobilizing, and creating change in their communities. And you talked about, in Innocent, I mean, like you said, the story of women being able to give out contraceptives, condoms, counseling. It's like one woman is a one-stop service center, right? Yet she doesn't get funded like a one-stop service center does, and in so much of funding of development, governments, especially government donors, pour so much of money to like kind of build the roads, build the hospitals, and build, the centers, right? And yet, global public health, because simply this, I was, we're sitting in a public health school, is actually run by unpaid labor of women, or very underpaid labor of women across all of the global south, So how do we get resources to those type of women who are doing these services almost free of charge, because and make sure that their important work gets done, because the public health system crashes if women don't work.
Yeah. I mean, you and I have both been decades, even just convincing people that community health workers should get paid. I mean, it's insane that we have to even say that government should support this work, which is their really only vehicle into the communities, their only vehicle to changing the status quo around healthcare. But yet to say that these women should get funded, and they should, I mean, literally just, small amounts, stipends, I think we were calling them at the ministries of health, right? Very little stipends to these women was always perceived as like a no, are you serious? And it's just like, yeah, we're serious. They need to eat too. And the way that women spend money. So when you pay these women, they pay school fees, they buy food, they buy seeds, in fact, in some places, so that they can grow food, not just for their immediate family, but for the extended family in their communities. So what seemed like a no-brainer for some of us has always been met with resistance. And we hope that this is changing, but the pinkwashing you're talking about is showing us that, in real facts, we're still not getting the resources to where they need to be.
Yeah, and I also was remembering, the story of the refugees, right? And somehow, like, I feel like, women, when we sit across like different communities, right? And we're able to talk about the situation of other women, they completely just moved, right? So it's women who are starting up, not only, in the early years, centers for crisis centers, right? For violence and rape. But now you see the leaders in work around refugees, migrant workers, somehow, whatever we have faced in our life, as our life experience, just, calls us to connect with all of those who have been so underprivileged or so violated or so, oppressed in so many settings. And those are the things that are really underfunded, right? Like this breaking work of like providing services, health care, So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how we can move people to fund these women, because that's something that, I think it's a common passion for you.
Of course. And in the book, I talk about, chapter 4, which is really about sort of how I grew up. And so, again, shout out to my mother, because it's really in some ways her story, but also spotlights Tarana Burks. And we talk about not stopping, the fact that feminist funding means you have to be in it for the long game. And a lot of laws were passed, many of us remember, around sexual violence and violence against women. Even still, we're seeing more and more policies coming through, but the realities, the lived realities, and we saw during COVID, right? So many more women were experiencing violence at home during the pandemic. And so the very place that we had to be, women were actually in the most danger. And so how we showed up in that way, people were like, oh, we have a law against that, you can call the police. And it was like, well, but how is that going to help? So a lot of the places, and Tarana mentions this in the book, but a lot of the places that had direct services for these women also couldn't function during the pandemic. And also for years have been receiving less and less money, because the funders were like, no, we're good, we passed the law, that's illegal now, it's a war crime, actually, sexual violence against, but the facts are, that more and more women were still experiencing violence during a very crucial time, and we weren't showing up for them. And so I think what we have to remember is that it's a long game, social change. It's not a short time, and these women are not in a position to be able to stop just because the law changed. They have to stop when that thing stops, when that thing changes. It's the transformation of society that they're looking for. Everyday feminists are not, sort of like, okay, and next year when we pass this law, when it finally passes, then we're good. We're going to move on to another thing. No, they are in it for their lifetimes. And sometimes, their daughters and their sons' lifetime. So it is, I think, incredibly important that for us, as we show up, that we show up for the long time. And it's important. So I have to say it here. I said it, I opened CSW, this year. And I said it then in front of all of our colleague heads of states that it can't just be, restricted funds. It has to be unrestricted. It has to be core. It has to allow them to pivot when they need to. I mean, how important was it for them to have, Global Fund for Women funds that we were like, go ahead and do what you need to do. Women who have been working for years on maybe economic changes were now all of a sudden making PPEs because they needed it, or in communities where there was no clean water, trying to bring in water. So we need this, long-term efforts. We need unrestricted funding so they can use it for their core needs. And we need to make sure that we stop pretending that they don't need money, because I think that's wrong.
Yeah, and I think that also this book is very timely, and because it reminds us, we're talking about social change, but we're not actually operating in a vacuum, right? We're not going from step 1 to step 2 to step 3 and seeing progress, but we are seeing a very organized backlash, against women's rights, which is why the need for, not only thinking pieces, but also, mobilization and funding so that we don't experience those rollbacks, although I know that we all just recently experienced a very bad rollback,
US group. So we're particularly,
so yeah, so I think that maybe we can also talk, maybe you can share some things that you have learned about but opposition has always been there, right? And I think that with Dreamy, we say there was not always opposition, but I think looking at and the growth, the mobilization, the capture of young audiences against this anti-gender ideology, which they have come up with, which really show that it's very powerful. And a lot of the things that we are hearing now is just not even about what I always call the push button issues in communities, right? Like, abortion, comprehensive sexuality education, and LGBT are usually the push buttons in but it's even into simple things like gender mainstreaming and gender equality, about like things like paternity leave and equality for women within like family, having custody over children, which have been like kind of, how do I say, co-opted by men's rights activists and, men going their own way. I'm learning all these acronyms now. So men going their way, let them go their own way when they want to, but don't interfere with our lives, right? But the thing is what are the connections that you are making about, the greater need for us to really mobilize, again, together, and take back the power and take back what is ours, because if we don't take it back, they will take it away, is the lesson, right?
So chapter 10. So okay, everybody in chapter 10 is Loretta Ross, which many of you know. She's our star here. So she created and is one of the leaders in reproductive justice, which is the class that I teach, which many of the folks in here are in. And she talks about this, she talks about, first of all, we need to better partner, right? So reproductive justice comes out of a framework that both Black and other women of color had to look at an intersectional way of looking at reproductive rights, because it wasn't enough just to think about abortion or the right to not have children, because we still living in a society where the right to have children and so many other cases where even if you have children, to be able to raise them in a safe community and environment were being affected, continuously, particularly in the history of this country. And so this ability to be able to partner together and think more broadly about the issues that affect all of us is going to be very important, because our opposition does well with sort of divide and conquer, right? Separate us, whether that's by color, by age, by, our sex, to be able to sort of break us down in those silos. And so we can think more intersectionally and partner better. And this is what the book really is talking about. As feminists, as womenists or whatever you want to be called. But if we stay together, then we're stronger as a unit and our voice becomes much stronger. And so for us, that's a big part of the book. And then another chapter, and I think that's 11, I have to look at it, but it's about starting feminists young. And so being a vehicle, I was just with our colleagues from Uganda, CSW, and they were talking about the divide between older women's organizations and younger women's organizations. And it's such a big thing because by the older groups, they're seen as, oh, all you guys do is, advocate online, not, like you're not really there to do the work. And then of course the younger groups are like, and all you guys do is hobnob with the heads of state and, and show up at these spaces. And so we, also have to get our shit right, if that's allowed, because if we are not one really constant, fierce, powerful, united in solidarity group, then we're not going to be able to fight back, not with the resources our opposition is using to keep their side of the line strong. So I think just thinking about it as more of how we get stronger without even worrying about what they're doing, but how we stay connected, how we make sure that what we are saying, it's almost like we got a bunch of comms people here, our talking points are right, so that we come with the message, we come with the strength, and we stay connected in solidarity.
I think that's so true. I think the intergenerational divide is, amongst the feminist women's movement is across the globe, right? But I think instead of like kind of killing our own or focusing on our differences, I think one is that we have to recognize that the battle has so many fronts now. I think in the 1990s, in the big conferences of Beijing and Cairo, those battles were, in the UN, trying to like get member states to like, and so hence the older feminist way of like just going to Commission on Status of Women, Commission on Population and Development, and the UN spaces in order to make it free. And whereas like, right now online, is what we are talking about, like in a lot of the work that Arrow does with young people. We know that, the digital violence that is happening, the harassment, the bullying of women, it's almost, it's so real, and it also spills over to the real life because, women's human rights defenders are getting doxxed or, with fake deep fakes or whatever, it's called, it's, and so the online violence, which is minimized, is translates to physical violence. And actually more than that, it even enters the headspace, right? So it's actually mental violence because mental health is being destroyed of these young women who are going online to express, what they think about the world, So I think that that's like something which kind of unites us. And I think the more intergenerational dialogues there are, it helps in like building the understanding that I guess of the entire architecture. It's not about whether your battle is important or my battle is important. It's like every battle is important and we can't lose any of it, So
absolutely. And this is what CSW was about this year, or is about. I'm sorry, it's actually in play, but it's about the digital divide, and it's how to look at it, innovation technology from a gender perspective. And it's really the first time that we've done that. Definitely at the UN, which, by the way, they were like, you really shouldn't talk so much about gender equality. We really are talking about how to include women in the overface. I'm like, well, if you think they don't want to hear gender equality, they certainly are not going to care about, us being involved in digital equality. So, but we are, I think, trying really, really hard to make sure that the right voices are in the room. And it's not, it's not a given that just because a woman becomes a politician and a leader, that she cares about the same issues that the feminist movement cares about. So that's not what I'm talking about. Representation is hella important, but it's the quality of the representation at these things. It's who shows up in the digital space, and it's how they're protected in that space to be able to voice what they ultimately are trying to change in their communities. And that has been the thing that when you look at it, whether you're a politician or, just a regular advocate, the attack on women online is far outweighs what their counterpart males get. And that is what we can protect. That is what governments can try to really work on, is this misinformation, this ability to attack people, which, as you said, then comes into their real lives and put them at danger. And these are things that we have to work on. But first, you got to care. First you have to care about women and what they represent, offline and online. And that's the whole point of the everyday feminist. It's like these women, may not, show up as your Jacintas of New Zealand, who also is an amazing everyday feminist, but they are doing what they do in their communities, and the network of them has to be respected, it has to be prioritized, and it has to be resourced.
No, and I think that, you touched on governments, right? Mm-hmm. We lived through the COVID pandemic where it seemed like, governments don't care. And for the longest time, we have been talking to governments to care about, women and foundations and institutions. So what are some of the strategies that we can actually use to make them care?
One thing I say, and so at the end of the book, because it's my book, I get to dream a little bit about like what it would really mean to show up for everyday feminists. And there's a specific section about governments. And the first thing I put is this thing about protection. You have the ability as a government to protect, human rights defenders, those that speak up for the work that they're doing. It was interesting in Iran, you remember when the young lady was arrested and later murdered, and they said it was all about her hair, when everyone who knows that struggle there and what she was protesting and what she had been organizing and leading was about the government, and so we have to have a system, and this is my dream, I'm saying, a system that there is no tolerance. I was about to say effort, but no tolerance for when those things happen. We should not allow it. We have systems and structures that can be put in place that any kind of assassination of a human rights voice, particularly of a human rights women's defender, there should be protections in place that say that governments pretty much, you can't talk anymore if you are in a situation where a woman has been murdered because of what she believes and what she's been standing up for and what she's been doing in her community. And so that's the first thing, because I think that's the thing that's easier for governments to do. And then of course I talk about then the funding situation and how overseas development assistance gets, most of us in this room, and I hope my students now have, there's like how much of that money actually goes to the countries and communities that it was allocated for. So much of it goes through the development complex that hardly, very little of it ends up with those women, so little of it. And that's another thing they can do. And, we hear about it, the localization and, funding local partners, but it is the ability to actually make that happen in real life, let me just say, not just the reports and things like that. So those are the two things that I would say. And there's a lot more, but I won't go into it about what governments can do to be better advocates for and supporters of everyday feminists.
Yeah, and I also was thinking that perhaps one of the things that we're seeing definitely in my part of the world, and I think Asia exports some bad practices to other parts of the world, is that government regulation coming into groups receiving that funding. So while Global Fund for Women and Arrow, we are advocating for resources to reach grassroots organizations. So you have like in India, a rule like the FCRA or the Foreign Currency Regulation Act. So if you have like foreign funding, you first have to be registered and get this FCRA certificate so that you can get the funding, right? And then you have things like, and so many, and we've seen it like in Bangladesh. And yeah, so how do we also advocate to governments that, don't put this in place? Because, they utilize this, money laundering act, terrorism money, and blah, blah, blah. And the flow of funds is, black money flows or whatever you call it. And what they do is utilize that story to actually, curb civil society voices or human rights voices at country level from being able to mobilize, get their messages known, and just like kill them by giving them $0, right? Yeah. So
it closes space in the hopes, and the hopes that there is no opposition. And so for us at Global Fund for Women, and me personally, I feel like those initiatives, we do have to make sure that there is government pressure against those types of things happening, but we also have to follow what's happening in the country. So there are organizations pushing back, and they are doing amazing things. We talk about all these type of organizations all the time, including Arrow. we have to follow their lead. We have to support what they're doing in the country. There's no way Global Fund for Women is going to be able to gauge a campaign against India, right? And change it, even if we are advocating with our global North countries and governments to do that. But what we can do is those organizations that are closest to the challenge and the issue are coming up with solutions all the time. Part of the problem is they just can't get resources to really make those fights happen. So despite the laws, we know that there's pushback. People were talking about Ukraine and Russia. It was like, you can't just, fund Ukraine. There's opposition within Russia that we can support. And Global Fund for Women totally understands that. It can't come from just one approach. It has to be approaches that are local, that are regional, that we then tap into and try to support. In the book talks about that. I mean, literally the only solutions that ever work, and I'm honestly telling you, are the ones that come from the people in the country that are doing it. The solutions that come from these, the Londons and the New Yorks and the DCs of the world never work. And that's why development keeps getting a bad rap. It's because they're setting strategies of countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, somewhere that is, unique and different from the place where the issue is. And so it is going to be very difficult to solve those problems. But again, everyday feminists are in all of these countries and all of these communities, and they are coming up with solutions as fast as they recognize the problem. They're coming up with the solutions. They just need support. They need backup, and that's who we can be.
So what type of advice do you have for the aspiring everyday feminist?
Well, I don't think there's such thing as an aspiring. I'm pretty sure by the nature of you being here, you're everyday feminist, man, woman, it doesn't matter. I do believe that we have to keep doing what we do, though. Again, we can't get tired. We can't feel like, what I'm doing is not enough. Or, okay, I just got denied a grant from such and such. So I can't keep moving. I can't keep pushing. I can't keep organizing. I can't keep mobilizing. It's like you can, and keep doing it. And just understand that there are people like myself, Siva, and many people in this room who are going to be there to back you up, who are going to be there to be able to give you, even if it's just $1,000 check, to be able to get you something, to get you moving, to get you started, and to introduce you to others. Because I know it's a big part of what Arrow does, to introduce you to other organizations in your country, in your region, that are doing similar things to you, and together in solidarity, you can be able to keep doing that. And I believe that's who we have to be. We have to keep showing up.
And I think that one of the things about, because we've been so under-resourced, right? So our resources, we largely, as we like the monetary resources, but our resources are friendships, right? Connections, shared strategies, and all of that. And I think that, part of what you were speaking about that really resonated with me is that you can be a feminist in every organization, in every field, and we need all the feminists everywhere, right? Agitating for change, because everything needs feminists. So now
we are all over the place. We just gotta look for each other, right? We just gotta, and again, close down the divides. It's like we're everywhere. We look like everything. We are not just women. We are not just trans. We are just everything. We should completely find our space with each other wherever we are.
And okay, yeah, and so we have do we have time for audience questions?
Just a few moments, but we have a bit. I have a microphone if folks, I can pass around if folks in the audience have questions.
We kind of went on, yeah.
I was thinking no, because I keep seeing 12:13 p.m. up there. So this is where
I'm countdown isn't working.
We do have a question online.
The online question is, what are the top significant barriers that stop women from having leadership positions, in your opinion?
That's a great, plain in one of them, there's a little subsection just, that I put this straight up racism. We still have those isms. Let's be clear. Separation, the racism, the sexism, they all still exist. And so I don't want to diminish those things because, and I'm living in the US like many of us here. So these are still struggles that we are having in this country. And of course, we see it in many other countries, whether it's class, caste, or, many other areas. Those still exist, and those still are very big barriers. But, this whole kind of conversation about, what we do every day is leadership. So I don't want us to believe that, sort of the VP or the president at a certain corporation is the only leadership that exists, because often when you go in those spaces, there are people who you follow. There are leaders there, and they many times aren't the VPs, are the presidents. I mean, they could be, but, often they're not. And so I want us to really sort of change the way we talk about leadership and make sure that we're following people who we admire, who we represent, and we're making sure that we support them from behind. And so then the barriers are less, if you think about it that way. If you think about it only as getting a CEO position as leadership, then it's going to be difficult, because we're still living with a lot of these sort of societal ills that we have inherited over the last, 5-6 centuries.
That's true. So any other questions? Because if they aren't, then I'll add to your thing. So one of the things that we found in in Malaysia, and I think the same story came up in India as well, is that while women are getting increasingly well educated, but because of the care work that they have to perform, because the state does not provide for childcare work. So upon marriage and when they start having children, they drop out of the workforce, right? And so the labor force participation of women from the ages of 24 to 35 kind of drops down, and I mean, I myself took a break after my maternity, and only for about 8 months, and found it almost so difficult to get back in at the level that you were, and you have to sacrifice in order to you start lower, or you start with a lower pay or a lower type of job to get back into the game, right? So you can only imagine the barriers that women who want to spend time and care for their family and their children for those years are being penalized, for that very care work that on International Women's Day is kind of praised and lauded as this hero, right? I mean, so some of those structural inequities that we face stop us from kind of rising to the top of our professions or being recognized for it. Yeah,
very good point.
She has a question there. Oh, they haven't. Oh, those are names for the freebies.
If you're gonna put your name in the hat, you have to ask a question. No, we're just joking.
I've been thinking about what you've been saying about supporting women's groups and localization and all that kind of stuff. And I feel like nowadays the conversation gets stuck on the idea of capacity building. So even when we think about women and their inability to actually, break that ceiling, we have organizations talking about teaching women leadership or teaching organization capacity. How do we shift the conversation from that to actually a more effective way of directing funds to these groups and to women? Because I think we're sort of stuck in that. Even USAID, all these organizations are stuck in that mode currently.
And the capacity building question, is that what you're? Yeah.
And then I'm glad you spoke about Rwanda, because I think Rwanda now has one of the most gender diverse parliaments. And I keep thinking about the backlash I'm from Kenya, so the backlash towards women, and how we have movements like the evangelical movement is just driving a lot of these conversations. And I keep wondering, how do we build our own movements to counteract that? Because even in the US, Roe v. Wade didn't just come from anywhere. It comes from a very organized movement to reduce or remove women's rights. How do we build our own movement that effectively? That's a big question, I think. But
so, I mean, I'll start with the capacity building, because I think it leads into the other one. I always talk about development because I've been in this game for about 30 something years, right? That was sort of the story we used to say 20 years ago. How long does it take to build capacity, right? I mean, we've built the capacity. I mean, look at this one. Look at this everyday feminist. I mean, in Malaysia, come on, the capacity is there. So I think at some point we have to realize, and maybe even pat ourselves on the back and be like, we've been working in solidarity together, and the capacity has been built. And I think taking it from that perspective and having leadership in these organizations, USA, all of them, that talks that way, I think is going to be important. I think it's actually really kind of embarrassing right now when we continue to talk like we just need to build their capacity, and it's like, whose capacity? And I mean, sometimes, and I don't want to be too out there, but sometimes I think we're building our own capacity when we go over to these countries, and people, like Siva are doing the programs, and we're asking her, tell me how you do your monitoring. What are you measuring? What's your impact? And all these things. It's like, who really capacity are we trying to build? And so I think using that and just sort of going into your next question about how we build movements, I think, again, movements start at the ground. They don't start at the sort of Harvard educated, no offense to Leslie, I know you're like, but it doesn't start there necessarily. It's usually starting in the community. And I think when you have, and a lot of our colleagues and my students in here know, it's like, what is sparking that? Where is the issue? And allowing that to be the lead and how we work through these issues. I think Roe, on the opposite side, the opposition to Roe has been fiercely organized. It has been extremely resourced. It is well communicated. And so it doesn't have to be just what we do. It is how we actually follow those who are most affected by the issues in our movement work. A lot of work is now happening with storytelling, making sure we understand who is touched by these issues. It's not just the framework of the organization, it is the people. And that's who we have to remember. That was the whole point of the Everyday Feminist, is remembering who are the people we're talking about. I don't know how much time we have.
I think we have time for.
So, Latanya, could you tell me, when one of the statistics was that, religious groups get the most money from ordinary people, right? If there are everyday feminists everywhere, what are we doing to get words out there, to sort of like get the society to realize also that we're deserving of their funding from below? And then from the top, from the state, do we have lobbyists embedded, in places like the Congress, like pharmaceutical companies and the rest of them had or have, so how do we go more into constructive dialogue on a sustainable basis, on an everyday basis with some of these power places?
I think it's a good question, Leslie. I mean, do we have advocates in these houses of so-called power to talk about our cause, and what's important to us? I will tell you, absolutely no. And organizations like, I know Global Fund for Women, I suspect Arrow too. Nobody's going to fund it. Even the most, liberal funders are not going to fund us to do that. And there's laws actually against it, and all the things she was talking about the closing civil spaces. It's like, again, we're not allowed to bring innocent into a parliament to talk about what she does at the shop. In fact, they probably will figure out a reason to arrest her, right? Instead of supporting what she was doing. And so I think we still have those challenges. I do think organizations like Global Fund for Women's job, and there are many others, is less about building capacity and just supporting what's going on in the countries and being in those rooms of power to discuss what we need to be doing as a group and how we need to be supporting and resourcing this work. I like sometimes to think that that's what my role is. I've done the capacity building thing for many years. Right now, I think what needs to be done is to tell an innocent story. And that's why I wrote the book.
I hate to cut this off, but this one last question.
One last. So to your point about the opposition and how organized they are in their message, I really love the title of your book and the way you capture these stories. So how do we get to the messaging of the everyday feminist? Because as you discussed, we have no advocates and the issues are so broad that how can we sort of capture and put a message out there that's consistent and that allows us to kind of go around the elephant, around those challenges to get to the resources?
I wish I had like this really intelligent answer for you, but I just say, some of you probably, you so young, don't remember Janet Jackson's song, "What Have You Done For Me Lately?" Because every time, even on International Women's Day, it's like, it's so nice that we love these women who are doing these amazing things. And, you know, we are always ready to lift them up. But I wish sometimes we could, in addition to, innocent is just so great, you know, look what she's doing. We could ask back like, well, and what have you done for her lately? And I feel like that, especially today, I got all these messages and from people who I'm like, but you don't even support us. It's like, you get, it's like, what have you done lately then? And I think that has to be the question that we ask back. It's like, we love Innocent, we love Siva, but the question is, what the hell have you done for her lately? That's what I'd like to talk about in the book. I mean, that's the whole point of the book. It's like, do something. That's the message. And we all have to be ready to do that. We can't just say that they're great. Loretta Ross is great. Who's supporting her? I mean, now she got the MacArthur grant, but I'm just saying, in general, it's been like 40 years of trying to get support for Sister Song, honestly, right? So, I mean, it's not enough to be like, what she says is so good, what she's doing is so good. It's like, all of us here, please follow up. Well, what have you done for the everyday feminist lately? What are you doing?
Well, thank you. Can we all give Latanya and Siva a big round of applause? This has really been incredible and an important conversation.